So you mentioned university, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, nice segue into what you did in your master's. So I know that you obviously came over here, and one of the subjects you did was art, and you were exposed to this whole world of just different types of art. And I know we spoke about it many times. You've introduced me to African art. I said that last time, and I do really do mean that. I think the fact that you've been able to do that, and I said that off mic, that I was really only European art. That's just the small kind of window into art that I had. I was mostly focused on obviously African art, writings and stuff like that, and knowing about Afro-American, Afrocentric kind of writing when I was growing up. You know, a lot of like Malcolm X, a lot of James Baldwin. I knew kind of Basquiat, but again, all these people are like American like perspectives of African culture, and so yes,
That's a whole struggle.
and that's a whole struggle in itself. You know, it's like a whole different tinted lens of it. But back to the point, the fact that you did art and you kind of studied that. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What was that like for you to start doing art, falling in love with art, and what were some of the things that you really enjoyed on your masters?
Okay, so goodness, that's such a big
I
question.
know. Take your time.
Yeah, okay, we'll dissect slowly. So my master's was in art history and visual culture. So art history is self-explanatory. Visual culture is everything other than sort of like the typical fine art history. Visual culture is music, it's TV, it's like film, it's everything else, everything creative, everything poetry, like, well, visual culture, it's more visual, but it's all connected. It's all connected ultimately.
Yes.
And so that was 2 years that I studied that. And honestly, it took me on a whole journey. It was beautiful. Most of my lectures and stuff. So my campus was in South Kensington, where all the museums are. So I got to have lectures dotted around in
That's incredible.
the museums,
And
in the
lectures
galleries.
in the museums itself, and we're talking about the pieces. While
And my
sitting in-
lecturers were fantastic. Like, I loved all of them. There were obviously different modules. I think my favorite was world arts. And then I specialized in museum education, which is where my Horniman journey started,
which we're talking about.
which we're going to talk about soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such an interesting course. I highly recommend it to anyone, honestly.
So yeah, try break down that for me. So you said it's art history. So let's
Yeah.
start with that art history. What did they teach you about art history? What is art
So,
history?
so like Renaissance art, I think we had a fine art module. No, not fine art, classic art,
Yeah.
classical art.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the module exactly,
I
but
don't know the name. I'm
it's
just
like
guessing.
Renaissance art. You trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to believe anything I say.
I would believe it.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
What can you do?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was, old art, the lives of the artists. One of the key texts that we had to study, and I actually sleep to it now as like an audiobook because it's very comforting. It's The Lives of the Artists by Giorgio Vasari, and he's like the founding father of art history. He's like one of the first people ever to document the lives of artists, and that's what his book is called, The Lives of the Artists. And
Sorry to interrupt. What's
Yeah.
one artist that you related to from that kind of art history, or one artist that you maybe someone we know about or someone we don't know about that you found particularly interesting?
so I don't know that I actually related to any of them, honestly, but I found them very interesting regardless. Like Michelangelo, like, my goodness. And I think because I traveled to, last year I went to Florence and I got to see Michelangelo's David. And it was like a trip with my cousins. So my cousins came from South Africa and Michelangelo, and we saw the Michelangelo. So that was really lovely, because I learned about it and then I got to see it in real life, and we did one of those little walking tours where they tell you even more about it. And it's just I love the creative process. That's one thing, like any creative process. I love understanding how an artist got from point A, like idea, and then the process that they follow to get through to like the product that they produce. And I find the whole process fascinating. So that's always very interesting to see, and just seeing how people's like phases of people's lives and things that they've experienced and been through, how that is then poured into their art. And I love it. I love it. And I think just making those connections, I guess it's an interest in society. It's an interest in like social anthropology on a wider level, because we were talking about this last time, how things in society affect the individual, but then also the individual's journey themselves. And that's demonstrated in like artists like Van Gogh, where he had things going on inside his head, like also outside, but his internal struggle also dictated so much of his artwork. So I enjoy learning how artists go through that process, and yeah, so that was very interesting on the course. And then in terms of world art, I think that was more, it felt personal, man.
In what way?
World arts felt personal, because that's when I started delving into African art. And I also dealt a lot with sort of Black American art and how they portrayed the struggle and everything they went through their art. Like there's one particular curator / artist, Fred Wilson, who he was based in Maryland, and at the Maryland Museum, so Maryland is very historically famous for slavery, and infamous for slavery, and they have the Museum of Slavery. I can't remember exactly what it's called. It might be called the Museum of Slavery, but
that's a good title.
Yeah, it might.
To the point.
Yeah. But so he went into the museum and he portrayed the things in the museum next to, so they had like silver spoons and they had all these fancy things that they portrayed. And he brought out from the basement, he brought out the shackles, he brought out whips, he brought out things that, like the darker side.
To juxtapose both of them and
exactly.
how they both exist at the same time.
And it's and it's having those things out in the open, which then creates conversation, allows you to talk about these things, because so much of Western history is taught in a way that sort of covers up or just ignores the atrocities that actually happened.
Why do you think that is? I know you want to, please remember what you're going to say, but why do you think there's such an icky feel? I know, obviously, I know, understand why.
Because it's hard to talk about. Like, I get it.
Deal with it, though.
Yeah,
you have to talk through it.
Absolutely, but it's hard. Like, it doesn't. Like, I'm not justifying it to anything, because I obviously agree with you that it should be spoken about. But it is a hard conversation to have. But it can be facilitated so nicely through art, because you're able to have the conversations firstly around like-minded people, because you're gathering in places where there are other people interested in it as well. And it's a safe space, and it's all learning and growing. Nothing can be done now to erase the past. That's a no-brainer. Like, nothing, you can't change the past. But you can learn from it. That's a Lion King quote.
What Lion King references?
Lion King references. And yeah.
Can I go for something then? You were talking, first off, fantastic, you put, really, really well put. That's really, literally, I was clicking in my mind so many times. I didn't want to disrupt your flow, and I think I ended up disrupting your flow, so I'm sorry. But so you're mentioning a lot about just like how some of these artists, for example, Van Gogh, they would talk about how their internal would reflect in their art. And I know that you've also talked about this artist called Lisa Bryce, where she would now be her art will reflect the society that she's talking about, and how you can position art within a wider context of a society. And I think I mentioned this to you also. I find it fascinating the relationship that especially African artists have a struggle, and how the struggle that they go through, whether it's internally or maybe in this as a culture, will represent itself in their art. Because obviously, with all the backlog of history and all the pain that we share as a culture together, it affects so many things. It affects how we're brought up. It affects how our parents teach us. We talked about generational trauma before. I think a lot of that kind of like is a good pipeline into artists, because it feels like the pain has to be expressed somehow, and they find a way to express it. I try to do some of it through poetry, but also I know you also draw, and there's that kind of meditative kind of relationship that you have with creating. The creation of something can help facilitate the overcoming of something. And so talk to me a little bit more about that. Obviously touching on Lisa Bryce and what she did, but also how through your time here and through the museums that you visited, that you were introduced to the Horniman Museum, and how the Horniman Museum is trying to bridge that gap between what the past is and what the present is, by starting that conversation again.
Another big question. No
sorry.
pressure. No.
No pressure.
No, it's good. It's good. Everything interlinks. So we'll start with Lisa Bryce.